Hello and welcome to Doncaster and Bassett Law Teaching Hospital's annual members meeting for the 2021 to 2022 financial year. My name is Susie Brain England and I am the chair of the Trust Board. This is the third annual member meeting which we've conducted virtually, and we welcome all those watching this from home via Facebook or YouTube. Over the next hour or so, you will hear about our achievements as an organisation from April the 1st, 2021 to March the 31st, 2022. Throughout the course of the meeting, we will have much to discuss regarding COVID-19 and our associated response, as well as our achievements and highlights throughout the past 12 months. Coming up, we have our lead governor, Lynn Schuler, our Chief Executive, Richard Parker, and our Acting Director of Finance, Alex Crickmar. Following this, we will have a question and answer session with pre-submitted queries, and finally, we'll conclude the session. Before we start, can I remind our viewers that earlier this year, we hosted our annual members lecture, which focused on a range of topics. With 8 lectures from a range of Trust colleagues, you can view these short films by following the below link, which should be showing at the bottom of the screen right now. This gives you first-hand knowledge of some of the services from the people who deliver them. If you have a topic you'd like our team members to tell you more about at next year's lectures, please do not hesitate to send your ideas to us. So, without further ado, we'll move on to the agenda. Now, the first item is an item to note. Can I ask governors and members to note the minutes of the previous annual members meeting held on the 23rd of September 2021, and these can be found on our website DBTH NHS UK. Moving on to our next item, I want to give my reflection on the past year. The last 12 months marked one of the most challenging periods within the history of our Trust. Despite this, we have, with the support of all colleagues, made great strides forward. I'm happy to say that we're moving to a position where our recovery can start to begin in earnest, not just to restore services to where they were, but enhancing them, taking what we've learned through the pandemic and moving forward. Throughout 2021 and 2022, we have had to learn to live with COVID-19 whilst providing all of the services expected of us and those befitting our communities. It has meant that we've faced times of great hardship, particularly as we've experienced numerous further waves of COVID-19, particularly with the Omicron variant taking its toll on staff absence. However, we have persevered and we believe that together we have so much to be proud of and a lot to look forward to. As is detailed in the report which accompanies this meeting, in 2021 and 2022 financial year, we've cared for an additional 2,491 COVID-19 patients. This is in addition to 783,461 episodes of care which have taken place within our hospital sites. Our activity this year has far outstripped what has been seen in previous years and brings us on to parity, if not a little beyond, activity in 2019 to 2020, the period prior to the pandemic. Since March 2020, we believe Team DBTH has often been ahead of the curve on the important decisions related to COVID-19. Along with the tenacity, determination and can-do attitude of all colleagues, this proactive approach has put us in the best position possible to address the challenges of the pandemic. Furthermore, we believe this same outlook will help us as we look to recover and move on from these times. For very different reasons, and while there's cause for optimism, the coming years are going to be equally as challenging as the prior two. Throughout the rest of 2022 and into 2023 and beyond, It is our aim to recover strongly from the impact of the coronavirus, delivering high-quality care for our patients and trying to move closer to our goal to be considered to be outstanding. Additionally, as the overall governance and organisation of the NHS has changed, we also now find ourselves as a crucial part of two integrated care systems in South Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire, one of only a handful of trusts in such a position. The impact of this means that we now have to build stronger relationships with Nottinghamshire colleagues and continue to develop the collaboration in two places and two integrated care boards, known as ICBs. Therefore, as referenced earlier, we believe it's important that we try to get ahead of the curve once again, organising ourselves in such a way as to best deal with these upcoming challenges, as well as maximising the opportunities that will undoubtedly present themselves. There's a lot of work ahead, but I'm more than confident that Team DBTH measures up to the challenge and will forge ahead to further develop and enhance the services we offer to local people. Finally, we would like to thank staff, governors, members, volunteers, partner organisations, commissioners, regulators, indeed everyone who has worked with us over the last year, as well as our local communities. Your positive support has been overwhelming and has contributed to what's been a successful year in so many ways, despite the obstacles we have faced. As I reflected last year, the pandemic is not quite over yet, and potentially we have a very difficult winter ahead. However, with the experience and expertise we can count on, I'm sure we, like the rest of the NHS, will weather the storm, and with luck, a return to normality will be just around the corner. I'd now like to introduce our lead governor, Lynn Schuler, who will update you from the perspective of our Council of Governors.
Thank you, Susie. I'd like to start my first annual members meeting as lead governor with some thanks. Firstly, I would like to say thank you to Hazel Brand, our previous lead governor, for her tireless work in the role. Hazel proved herself to be supportive, accessible and knowledgeable, which was a huge help to all governors, and we wish her the very best in her role as non-executive director. I would also extend my thanks to the Trust Board office staff, non-executive directors and executive directors, all of whom have provided invaluable support and patience as I take over the reins alongside my Deputy Lead Governor, Andrew Middleton. This year, we have welcomed new governors and said farewell to others. Again, thanks to all who both continue their support of the team and those who have previously given their time in this voluntary role. Together we have a wide and varying range of skills and experience, all coming together to fulfil the requirements of legislation as set out by NHS England Improvement and act as critical friend of Doncaster and Bassetlaw teaching hospitals. Governors provide the voice of the community and hold the non-executive directors to account for the board's performance, both individually and collectively. We gain assurance in a number of ways. At board, we observe the challenge provided by non-executive directors to executive directors, ensuring the trust continues to perform as required. We attend committees as observers. We take part in joint training and briefing and quality assurance sessions. Our non-executive directors also attend our Council of Governors, and here as governors we can directly question decision making and obtain assurances required. Finally, we have the ability to raise questions outside the formal meeting, and these are logged and shared with all within the Governor portal. The new integrated care systems, of which our trust is part of two district organisations, see governors with additional responsibilities. This is doubly difficult with two systems to work across in South Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire. However, our non-executive directors and executive directors are ably led by our Chair and Chief Executive and are forging the links required, championing our role. In supporting collaboration between organisations and the delivery of better joined-up care, Councils of Governors are required to form a rounded view of the interests of the public at large. This is not new for our governing body. We have listened to our communities, although this has, in the backdrop of the pandemic, been difficult. To this end, we are looking to the future and actively exploring means by which we can hear the voice of the communities. We remind you that you are able to contact us through the Trust Board office, contact details being available on the Governor page and can be found at the bottom of the film as I speak. The Governor challenge as we move forward is to engage our communities wider and to understand your needs. We will, as always, continue to strive towards this whilst linking in with our partners in the wider ICSs and by providing updates in a number of formats. We have this year reached out to wider community groups representing a broad selection of our community, allowing us to know and understand how we can remove barriers and provide greater access to all. We would like to hear from anyone within our community of Doncaster and Bassetlaw, and to this end, we'd love to see more people taking the opportunity of being members of our trust. If members can share with their communities, friends and families how easy it is, just search Become a Member of DBTH and help us to shape plans for our future by sharing your voice. Thank you for your time, and I hope you find the rest of the meeting interesting.
Thank you, Lynn. Moving on with our agenda, I will introduce our Chief Executive, Richard Parker, who will update you on our progress in 2021-22 within the wider Trust.
Hello everyone, my name is Richard Parker and I'm Chief Executive at Doncaster and Bassetlaw Teaching Hospitals. It's my pleasure to present to you today at the virtual annual members meeting some of the highlights of the year 2021-22 and some of the challenges that we faced as an organisation in terms of delivering healthcare during the latter stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to begin today's presentation just by discussing some of the national and local context for the year, which we can't all fail to know was dominated again by the issues from the COVID-19 pandemic. Locally and nationally, we continue to see peaks of infections in the communities, which do translate into increased hospital admissions. And later on in the presentation and also in the copies of the annual members report that are available to the audience, you can see some of the detail and some graphs that demonstrate when those peaks in activity occurred and also the sorts of numbers of patients that we were treating at those times. But I will provide some detail as I speak today. So on top of the issues that were created by additional patients requiring hospital care as a result of COVID, everybody will be aware of the impacts on services that were dealing with significant changes to infection prevention and control measures, and as a result we're not able to offer as many operations, as many diagnostic procedures as perhaps we have in the past. And the need now to recover that activity and to increase those numbers of operations, the diagnostic tests, the CT imaging scans, the MRI scans, ultrasound scans, to levels that were pre-pandemic, so levels of 2019. So we have faced some challenges in respect of getting those services back up and running at those sorts of levels, because we still do and we still did have significant infection prevention and control challenges. But as we move through 21-22, many of those services are now back at those sorts of levels, but also the services that continue to be increasingly challenged as a result of new patients who need treatment are beginning to increase the numbers of patients that we are able to treat and in a more timely manner, because some of those issues were related to people having to wait longer for treatment. And clearly, from our perspective and from the community's perspective, the quicker we can reduce the waiting times for access to healthcare, the more comfortable we will feel, and obviously the better the service that patients will be able to receive from us. So that has remained a significant objective for us for this period, but it will also be a significant objective for us as we move through this financial year of 22-23. We clearly, as a national health system, are suffering from significant workforce issues. We did have support from nurses, doctors returning to support the efforts of COVID-19. But as we move through the next period with the increased activity levels and the increased need to perform more procedures, more diagnostics, the demand on the workforce does get greater. And what we will need to do is deal with some of those issues, particularly recruitment and retention, because if we can retain staff, and we can retain them from leaving the organisation or from retiring or from reducing their hours, then that will help us with the backlog and it will help us with the activity levels. And so a major strand of this year, 21-22, and the year that we're now in, 22-23, is around our workforce and our health and wellbeing offers, and I will talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. We're clearly doing that against a backlog that is both an effect of the pandemic, but also in terms of economic outlook and some of the factors that our wider communities are facing from the war in Ukraine and obviously from the cost of the pandemic, in a slightly different financial environment where actually we're having to return to a more robust budgeting management system that would be consistent with previous years, where we are now aiming to ensure that we can live within our means, within our allocated budgets. And 21-22 saw the beginning of that, where the organisation was returning to being able to be paid for the activity it was undertaking and trying to make sure we drive forward on increased activity levels to secure additional income. But we clearly have some costs in there, some additional costs that mean that it is a tight year in terms of finances. It was a tight year in terms of finances, and you will already have had the opportunity to look through the presentation from our acting finance director in terms of our achievements and being able to achieve our financial targets for the year. And moving forward into 22-23, we need to continue to ensure that we achieve our activity levels within budgets, but within budgets that are under pressure from things like the workforce and recruitment and retention issues. But as an organisation, we're aware of those and we're driving hard to make sure that that recovery in finances that we've been so clear on in recent years continues into 22-23. We also have seen a new statutory requirement of NHS organisations through the Health and Social Care Act being reformed in 22-23. From the 1st of April, we are now working within integrated care systems, and we as an organisation work within two. We work within South Yorkshire, and because of boundary changes that aligned health with local authority boundaries, we also now are a member of the Nottinghamshire integrated care system. And that, we think, is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to work much more closely rather than in competition with our sister organisations around us, so that for the communities we serve, we can support each other and we can also learn best practice from each other, so that our communities receive equal healthcare within frameworks that provide that in the same sorts of timescales. We do think it's an opportunity to look where we can better provide services to our communities, and builds upon some of the work that we undertook in 21-22 and previous years, working as an acute federation of trusts within a sustainability partnership arrangement. From 1st of April, as I've already indicated, that's a statutory responsibility to collaborate, and we do think, and we are an active member of both ICSs, to drive forward for improvements in the quality of our services for our communities, and that will remain a real priority for us moving through the next year. In terms of some of the detail around COVID, as I've indicated, the annual report and also slides that you will be able to see as part of my presentation will give you headline numbers. But in 21-22, the total number of patients we cared for with COVID-19 was slightly less than in the previous year. It was in fact 735 patients less, but we still treated 2,491 patients and were able to discharge home 2,069 patients who'd actually recovered from COVID. But very, very sadly, members of our community still did succumb to the impact of COVID and sadly passed away. Our thoughts and sympathies go to their families and friends. But I do think in the last year what we have seen is that the impact of the vaccination programme on the severity of illness has been really, really positive. And the rates of people who are succumbing to severe illness are dropping. And therefore we previously encouraged vaccination. We are encouraging vaccination this year, and if anybody on this virtual members meeting is wavering on vaccination, then please do investigate that with your local GP, with your primary healthcare services, because we really do believe that vaccination is one of the things that is in fact allowing less people to require hospital care and less people to suffer severe illness. I would also personally encourage influenza vaccination this winter because, again, in previous 2 winters, vaccination against influenza and also the measures in place of hand space ventilation have been really, really successful. We've had low levels of influenza in our communities, and what we don't want this winter is for our communities, our friends, our patients, our colleagues to have challenge from COVID and challenge from influenza at the same time, and the best way of preventing that is be vaccinated against both, but also to take simple measures of hand space, face and ventilation, because in the last 2 years those have really helped. So anything anybody on the members meeting can do to encourage that and to actually comply with that would be very gratefully received by us as an organisation, but also my friends and my colleagues in DBTH who are obviously striving to provide the best care possible and will do so through the winter period. In terms of detail, we have seen a significant number of peaks of COVID activity, either from very high baselines or as part of general trends in an upward direction. There's a very interesting graph in the packs that people can refer to, which sort of demonstrates where those peaks have been. And clearly what we're now trying to do through the measures that we've already talked about is to lessen the number of peaks and actually to lessen the number of patients we receive and the number of our communities who are actually suffering from COVID infection at any one time. And that's really, really important to think as we learn to live with COVID-19 as part of our normal patterns of viral illness. In terms of the key points, as I've already mentioned, we've been striving to restore services and activity. We were relatively successful in 21-22. We need to continue that, redouble our efforts and hopefully provide services at the national quality standards of 104% of the 19-20 activity for elective procedures and planned procedures, and 120% of activity in 2019-2020 for diagnostic procedures, and we are going to do our very, very best to achieve those standards as quickly as possible. We do need to do that within the context of that there will still be some COVID infections, certainly in the next year or so. We don't expect to have any periods where there's no COVID, and I think it is about learning to live with the impacts of COVID, as historically we've learned to do with viral illnesses like influenza and norovirus. We will, I think, in the short term, as we have through the pandemic, need to take some of those infection prevention and control procedures, and we need to tighten them at times when there are high rates in the communities. But we were and we have been able to reduce some of the visiting restrictions that we know were so difficult for our patients and their families, and we will try to maintain as much of open visiting and access to relatives in hospital as possible, whilst driving at that aim of keeping people safe, keeping our patients who are vulnerable safe and keeping our staff who are caring for them safe. So please do bear with us if there are periods where we are applying enhanced infection control procedures just to make sure that we're as safe as we possibly can be. I think in the period 21-22 we saw slightly higher than previous years sickness absence, because our staff are members of the community, and if rates rise in the community, it's likely that our staff will suffer the effects of that, and we'll have more staff who actually do need to take time off as a result of COVID infections. But again, we're vaccinating heavily this winter. We achieved 97% of staff vaccinated with the first dose in 21-22. We achieved 94% of staff vaccinated with a second dose and 90% of staff with a third dose. We want to, and we hope to, achieve very high levels, those sorts of levels in this coming winter period. And as I've already indicated, I would encourage absolutely everybody to consider vaccination, and unless contraindicated, to please support the vaccination programme. In terms of performance in 21-22, the detailed graphs and slides in the presentation will indicate that most of our services are broadly similar to they were in the pre-COVID years, and we did see an increase in activity in line with my earlier comments. Our emergency care pathways have returned to the previous levels, and in fact, in some respects, we're seeing an expected number of patients higher than in the previous years, because historically A&E attendances for emergency care have risen each year for the last decade or so. So they're not broadly outside of that, but what we would do, and particularly through the coming period, is we would encourage people to be aware of what's available to them in primary care, and to make sure that ahead of any illnesses they're aware of the options that they've got for seeking help and support when it's needed. Because our A&Es are under challenge and under pressure, we expect that to continue through the winter period, and we do want people to receive the right care at the right time, but specifically from the right service. So if members of the audience could refresh themselves in terms of what you can receive from 111 from local pharmacists, and also the offer from general practice. General practice has been very busy through COVID-19, adapting to different ways of working, and actually have in the main restored services, although the demand has increased, which I think is why members of the public are experiencing pressure in terms of accessing services. I don't think that's because the services aren't there particularly. I think the demand has risen, and what we're all trying to do now is adapt to the ways in which we can provide that demand so that our patients receive the service that they need and they want. And we as an organisation, and working with our colleagues in our two places and with our colleagues in the system, will continue to seek to provide services in a timely way for our patients and our communities. And hopefully the graph that you'll be able to see in there will reassure people in terms of the sorts of levels of activity we're now providing to our communities. In terms of operational performance, for members of the audience who've viewed or attended previous annual members meetings, we talked about things like the 4-hour A&E standard of being seen, treated, admitted or discharged within 4 hours of attendance. Clearly, in the context of the pandemic, that was really, really challenging, and actually we've not been able to restore that level of performance to the target of 95%. And in the year we achieved 73.26%, which was broadly in line with what the National Health Service had delivered across the country. We did that, as I've said, against an increase in attendances in the year of about 5.7% since 2019-20. So from a practical point of view, it is a challenge. We are striving to improve that, and we will continue to strive to improve that. But we are offering different pathways at the moment, and we're managing significant pressures. But for our communities, it is important to know that we are absolutely doing everything that we can to change the way in which to deliver service models, to make sure that when patients do attend with an urgent and emergency need, they're seen and treated as quickly as we can possibly manage, receiving the right care and treatment in the right place, and that we will continue to strive to achieve those quality standards that we were able to do pre-pandemic and we want to be able to do post-pandemic. So as I've said, our communities receive high quality services when they need them. It is a similar pattern around referral to treatment time, where in previous annual members meeting we've talked about quality standard of 92% of patients achieving treatment within 18 months. Clearly that was very, very challenging during the pandemic. We are trying to recover that, and in this particular year we achieved 68.3%, which was up from the previous year, where it was 65.7%. But as you will have gathered from the presentation today, a lot of effort is going into restoring services, and through the next year we do expect to see those numbers rise, and we do expect to be delivering more and more services to patients as the year develops. In terms of our emergency work and our urgent work and our cancer and diagnostic work, those services have remained our priorities through the pandemic, and they remain our priorities now. We're very, very focused on delivering our cancer pathways in timely manners so that patients who are referred by their general practitioners for assessment for and diagnosis of potential cancer receive that within the national quality standards. We achieved 3 of the 9 standards in the 21-22 period, but importantly our 2-week wait performance, which is the standard from patients who are referred from general practice will be seen in hospital within 2 weeks. We managed to achieve 87.5%, and I think that was because we absolutely are focused on those pathways being the ones to try to restore activity levels to pre-pandemic as quickly as possible, because we realise that they are so important to our communities and our patients, and we will continue to do so. In terms of those types of services, we were very, very pleased to receive funding from the government for a community diagnostic centre at Mexborough Hospital, which is about providing greater access to local people for things like CT, MRI, ultrasound, blood tests. The Mexborough Phase 1 scheme has been developed and access to those services has been increased. There is a further scheme that we're undertaking this year, Phase 2, which extends that, and we're looking to develop Mexborough as a site for diagnostics, but also in future maybe as a site for the provision of elective operating services, so that patients are not affected by cancellations or other pressures as we go through the winter months. And there'll be more about that, I suspect, in next year's annual members meeting. In terms of our staff, it was pleasing that in the main our staff survey results were consistent with the NHS, and in many respects were slightly better than the wider NHS, because our staff have been under pressure. They have had significant challenges, and it would not be unusual for those challenges to relate to how our staff are feeling. The actual presentation is available. You can see the detail on there, and you can also see how we compare to the wider NHS. And you can sort of see that the wider NHS had results that were in 35% were similar to previous years. We were 51%, so we were holding up reasonably well in that. A lot of effort has gone into health and well-being, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. But absolutely it remains a focus for the reasons I've mentioned, that retention will be a key moving forward. We need to do as much as we can to retain our colleagues in service, providing care to our patients. And the way in which we'll do that is to try to make sure that the offer we have as an employer is recognised by our staff, and they also tell colleagues in other trusts and otherwise that we are an organisation that is good to work for, because that will make it easier moving forward in the next few years in terms of having the right professional staff in the right place to provide the services we want. But please do take a look at the survey results in the annual members report, and also associated to this presentation. In terms of some of the key works, we clearly before the COVID pandemic were striving really hard to make the case for a new hospital for Doncaster. That remains a priority, and the work has continued through 21-22. The Board of Directors approved an outline business case for submission to the NHS, and we do want to try to secure funding as part of the government's new hospital programme, and hopefully this year we'll see some progress, and hopefully we'll get a positive outcome for that work. But despite the work in terms of the new hospital, we are able to do a significant amount of capital work, and our capital expenditure in the year, which will be covered in more detail in the Finance Director's report, was £35.5 million. And that did include some backlog expenditure of £7.8 million, because Doncaster particularly is an ageing site, and keeping the site running is an expensive exercise. But it's very, very important that we continue that work until we do get a decision on either a new hospital or an alternative around refurbishing and redeveloping parts of the existing DRI site. Clearly our objective and our priority would be a new hospital, that would be our preference. But in the meantime, what we will be doing is using some of our capital expenditure to make sure that things like the electricity supply, the water supply, the work that we do on replacing more aged buildings continues. We also in year had a significant expenditure as a result of an incident in Women and Children's where we had a very major leak on our heating supply. Now, it's easy to assume that that was associated to backlog maintenance on the age of the building, but actually it was an unexpected event in a hot water pipe, a major hot water pipe, where for reasons that the pipe was enclosed in heat control lagging, it had been leaking, and unfortunately that leak became significant, and unfortunately the water met a high voltage electricity supply, and as a result we had significant damage to the electrical infrastructure within the Women and Children's Hospital. As always with these things, our staff responded magnificently that day. It was a significant challenge and it was a significant incident, but colleagues managed it in an exemplary way. No patients or staff came to harm as a result of it, but it did mean that the services were disrupted as we had to vacate the building whilst initial assessment work was undertaken. And since that period, again, colleagues have been absolutely exemplary in supporting the refurbishment and the repair of that building. We had to purchase a modular build to provide some of the capacity that was lost whilst we repaired and refurbished the areas. And that work has continued. The modular build in itself required £11.6 million worth of investment, but that's a service that actually can provide us with 20 or 30 years worth of good accommodation. And as with modular builds, if we do make progress in terms of being able to redevelop or ideally move to a new hospital, then the modular building itself could also be moved to one of our other sites to continue to provide valuable support to the work that we wish to undertake. It's very high quality premises, and in this last year we've been able to use it to support the refurbishment of our maternity areas. At the moment, our central delivery suite is currently in use in those areas whilst we refurbish the labour ward to provide a new labour suite, to provide a new birthing centre, and to provide a serenity area for families in the event of a significant life experience event that some, unfortunately, families do face. It's a lovely quiet area for families to be together as part of that wider refurbishment, and expect to be completed in December. And I'm sure for the staff that will be something that they really do look forward to as they return to a more permanent home, but in facilities that are more fit for the year that we live in. In terms of other works, we clearly have done a lot of estates type of works, as I've mentioned, and we continue to do so. We've also spent a significant amount on equipment replacement, including CT scanners and other major items of equipment. Those were only possible because of the work that we did on electrical infrastructure, and if you visit the Doncaster site, you'll see that there's a number of new electric substations to deal with the fact that modern medicine and modern technology does consume more electricity than in previous decades. And actually it was really important that, as I said earlier, we continue with that refurbishment renovation of the site to make sure that we remain fit for purpose whilst we await a decision on the new hospital build. We have got schemes that have already started in 21-22 that will actually further accelerate. I've already touched on the Community Diagnostic Centre. At Bassett Law Hospital, we've been doing a lot of work around the Urgent Emergency Care Village, which is a refurbishment of the Accident Emergency Department. In recent months, building upon the work in 21-22, we are replacing radiated aerated concrete in the roof above the A&E, which is currently housing the mental health services. Once that work is completed, we will then go on to provide that new facility for our communities in Doncaster, which will be our urgent emergency care village. That will provide opportunity to enhance the services, such as children's services we've been able to provide, but also will allow colleagues to be co-located so that the person's journey can be more streamlined, and actually our staff can work together in a more consistent way because they're actually working in co-located environments rather than in different parts of the Bassett Law site. As I've indicated, the next developments of the Montague site, which was started in 21-22 and which continue, will be enhancing the Community Diagnostic Centre with potentially what will be known as the Montague Elective Orthopaedic Centre. We finalising business cases at the moment for that to secure funding, and if those are successful, what we will have is an elective care centre that is available to our communities at Mexborough, so that through the challenging months or through peaks of activity through winter, we will still be able to do the operations as planned without cancellations as a result of some of the things that you see on the news and you see locally, where some of our elective surgical beds are having to be used to cover some of our emergency workload. We don't have an A&E at Mexborough, and therefore it is a site that is relatively protected from those sorts of pressures in winter, and if we are successful in our business case, will be a huge opportunity, I think, for us as an organisation, but also for colleagues in Barnsley and Rotherham, because this is a service that we're working together on to provide a facility that equalises access across our ICS. And as I said, we're hopeful that a combined business case will get approval later in this financial year, so that we can actually start work on and complete that scheme as quickly as possible. As I've already touched on, we have had major work around health and wellbeing for our staff. We've significantly improved our health and wellbeing offer for staff. We enhanced services such as counselling services, because clearly staff who've been under pressure do need that sort of opportunity to be able to talk to people about what they've experienced. And also we provided things like Reiki services to them, which are, you know, the next step and the next level and opportunities to, in essence, look after our staff a little bit better than historically we might have done, because actually they need it at this moment in time, and because of the couple of years of challenge that they've had, and staff have welcomed that, I think. We also created 2 rainbow garden spaces for staff, and also for our communities who have lost loved ones, and very sadly we've lost colleagues during the pandemic, and we want to provide areas of contemplation on our 2 major sites where staff could spend some time, perhaps at lunchtime, perhaps at the end of a shift, where it was just a quiet space to be able to reflect and to enjoy their environment. So we're really pleased with the results of that work, which was supported by charitable donations and by the efforts of our communities. We've also been able to undertake some very, very special thank you events for the staff, like our Yorkshire Wildlife event, where we brought staff and families together so that they had some quality time, which we are aware is really, really important when you've gone through difficult challenges like the pandemic, and we're expecting and hoping to do some more of that this year. And in October this year, we will restart our annual thank you awards, which were sadly suspended during the pandemic for the reasons we would all understand, but we're actually going to restart in October and bring together an opportunity to reflect on good practice throughout the year, the things our colleagues have achieved, and recognise you know, some of those really extraordinary efforts in what has been an extraordinary year. We also took the opportunity to do some special events around Christmas time as well for staff, you know, with the 30 days of Christmas events and others, again to recognise their efforts, but also to enhance our health and wellbeing offer, to try to make sure that our staff, as I said earlier, view us as a really great employer, and actually an employer who is interested in focusing on their health and well-being, because happy staff will provide better care to our patients, and our aim is to provide better care. As we move forward through this year, we will see some, and we have begun to see some changes in the board of directors. We have lost our Chief Operating Officer, Becky Joyce, who has changed roles. David Perdue is a long-standing member of the organisation, and our chief nurse has secured a post in the integrated care system in the North East and has taken up that post now. We're about to recruit to a new chief nurse. We've already reputed to a chief operating officer. Denise Smith will be joining us later in the year, and I'm sure that we will make great appointments to both of those posts. Pat Drake, one of our longer serving non-executive directors and our senior independent director and one of our clinical NEDs, retired earlier on in the year at the end of the 21-22 year, and we have been replacing non-executive directors. Hazel Brand, who will be known to many in the audience today as a long-serving governor, has been successful in securing a post as a non-executive director. We've appointed Joanne Gander, who is a nurse by background, who's joined us as our clinical NED, and we've appointed Mark Day to complete our non-executive director teams. We are clearly forming as a new board now with new colleagues, but as we do form, we do expect our board to be driving the sorts of improvements in performance that I've talked about in there, because we're really clear that we want to continue our journey to be outstanding. We have had challenges, but now it's important that we move forward. We learn to live with COVID and we begin to restore some of those services, ideally to at least the standard that we had pre-COVID, but more importantly to us, towards outstanding, so that as we progress in the next year or two, our communities and importantly our staff can see the progress that we've made in terms of recovering from the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of what's next, and the sorts of key challenges that we'll probably be touching on next year at the annual members meeting, we do need to keep an eye on COVID. We do need to take the measures that I talked about earlier in the presentation to try to make sure that we can manage winter as successfully as possible, that we can provide the services that our communities need, and we do hope that we continue to receive the support of our communities around things like the vaccination programme, hand space and ventilation, and obviously supporting us with making sure that our communities are aware of and access the right services at the right time. We clearly will be continuing to drive on the waiting list reductions and making sure that we're making progress towards reducing the number of times our patients have to attend the hospital by using virtual and other technology to make sure that those services are more widely available, but also more importantly that we reduce the time that our communities are waiting for access to hospital care, for diagnostics and for treatment, and that remains one of our major, if not our major focus, alongside of the emergency and urgency care pressures. As I've already indicated, our trust strategy is to continue to try to develop our estate, secure a new hospital, but also equally importantly, if not more importantly, to continue to drive towards being able to achieve in the near future a CQC outstanding rating for the quality of the care that we provide. We want our patients to receive the highest quality care that we can possibly deliver, and as we emerge from the pandemic, to be able to improve the quality of care as a result of dealing with some of the pressures. And as I said, hopefully that when I stand in front of you next year, we'll be able to talk about those improvements in things like waiting times and access to emergency care. In terms of further work with our partners, I've already touched on the way in which we're probably going to emerge around things like the Mexborough Elective Orthopaedic Centre. We clearly, as a group of hospital trusts, acute trusts in Sheffield, in Barnsley, in Rotherham, and ourselves, are really focused now on our need to collaborate with services to provide access locally wherever that is possible and in our patients' best interest, but also to look at some of the services that potentially are required less frequently or are so specialised that we provide them in a smaller number of areas, and make sure that when we do provide them, they are as local as possible and as high quality as we can make them. And I think this year we'll see some further developments of the integrated care system, some further developments of the acute trust working together under the auspices of the Acute Federation, and a lot of work around trying to tackle and deal with health inequalities, including things like access to service, because that is really important to us in our communities, that we need to make sure that we are reducing inequalities across all of our communities, and that our patients are more and more frequently receiving equal care wherever they live and whatever the services that they need are. And I think that is a real objective for us as a group of Acute Trust Chief Executives, working within places and working within integrated care systems. And as I said, we're doing that together and collectively to also work on the agenda that is the health and well-being offer for our colleagues, and increasingly we are integrating the way in which we think about the offers to our colleagues, the way in which we work with our colleagues, to again make sure that the staff within South Yorkshire feel that we're great employers, but where possible we're using the staff within South Yorkshire to achieve the highest quality of standards for the patients that we all serve and the communities we all serve, because we have a collective aim for South Yorkshire as an integrated care system to also be outstanding. And if I leave today's presentation with a key message, it is that our trust, myself, the board of directors, are absolutely committed to increase and provide services to our patients, but also to try to make sure that the quality of the services that we provide are the highest we can make them. And increasingly we're driving towards all of our services being in the upper quartile of performance nationally, so that we are achieving the national quality standards in all of their guises, so that our patients can feel confident in the quality and safety of the care that we provide. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me. I do hope that you find my presentation and the presentation of the chairman and my other colleagues really helpful. And I'll now hand over to the chairman again for the question and answer session. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Richard, for that comprehensive update. And just a reminder that you can follow us on social media, as well as check our website for regular updates on our position related to COVID-19 and other information. I will now introduce Alex Crickmar, our Acting Director of Finance, who will describe the organisation's financial position.
Hello everyone, my name is Alex Crickmar and I'm the Acting Director of Finance here at Doncaster and Basildon Teaching Hospitals. I'm here today to take you through a brief overview of the financial performance of the Trust from April 2021 to March 2022, and also a look ahead to the next financial year. In 2022, the Trust continued to operate under the national financial regime during the COVID pandemic, with our staff working tirelessly to treat our patients. Throughout the last financial year, the Trust earned £502 million of income, and after we made all our payments and covered all of our liabilities, we were left with a small year-end surplus of £2.7 million before any technical accounting adjustments such as impairments. Of the income the Trust received, we spent around £323 million on staffing, and we finished the year with just over £46 million of cash in the bank, which is obviously a substantial sum and speaks to the Trust's good financial position at the end of the year. In terms of the accounts for the year, the Trust had them audited by Ernst & Young, and they were happy to give an unqualified opinion on the accounts, and also an unqualified opinion on the Trust's use of resources, which is the third year running and is a significant achievement for the organisation. Throughout the year, we also spent a significant amount on capital of just over £35 million. This was on a number of different items. First of all, this included spending around £10.7 million on our estate, of which that money was directed at all 3 sites, concentrating on making parts of the site's infrastructure safe for our patients. Due to the Trust operating on an old site at Doncaster, the Trust continues to have a high level of backlog maintenance in comparison with other trusts. We also spent £14.6 million relating to the fire and water damage to the women's and children's part of the Doncaster estate. This spend also included the purchase of a brand new modular theatre and 2 wards, so that we could continue to treat our patients now and into the future. We continued our spend on the replacement and upgrade of our medical equipment and IT equipment, with extra funding provided in year relating to COVID pressures similar to the previous financial year. COVID in itself was still a significant issue in terms of cost to the Trust, and overall we spent nearly £10 million more on COVID related costs than in a normal financial year. £5.6 million of that was on extra pay, including additional staff to cover the segregation of areas between COVID areas and non-COVID areas, sickness cover, additional hours and additional work to cover testing and vaccination. We also spent £3.6 million on non-pay expenditure, most of which was the cost of testing kits and laboratory tests, all to do with the COVID pandemic. In terms of cash, the public sector was encouraged to continue to make sure that it paid its suppliers very promptly to keep cash flowing in the economy whilst the pressures of the pandemic were felt by industry, and we maintain that position throughout this year. As I mentioned earlier, the Trust maintained a healthy cash balance at year end, which was around £46 million. Looking forward to the 2022-23 financial year, the country continues to face the challenge of emerging from the pandemic, improving waiting times and recovering our backlog in terms of our elective patients, along with planning for winter. The NHS and the Trust is also seeing a significant challenge and impact of very high inflation, which in turn is impacting on the cost of delivering patient care, such as increased utility costs for our sites. As a result of all of these financial challenges, the Trust has a challenging £10 million deficit financial plan for the 22-23 financial year. You can see from our capital financial plan for the next financial year that was on a previous slide that the Trust is planning on continuing its spend on essential estates maintenance and improvement works. The spend on medical equipment and IT has reduced in comparison with the last couple of years as a result of the NHS moving back to pre-COVID levels of capital spend. Excitedly though, the Trust is also progressing its significant capital plans and proposals through various national programmes, including the Community Diagnostic Centre based at our Montague site, our Bassetlaw Emergency Village plans, continuing work on our proposal for a new build hospital for Doncaster, RAC works at our Bassetlaw site, and our electronic patient record programme. Before I finish, I just wanted to say that the Trust Board remains focused on ensuring it's providing the best value for money and is using all of its resources in the best way to treat all of our patients. Thank you for listening.
It's now time to move on to our question and answer section, where we will respond to questions submitted to us by members earlier this month. The questions will be read out by the relevant Executive Director, who will provide a succinct and comprehensive answer. So, it's over to you, colleagues.
This winter we are expecting at DBTH to find more patients coming through with COVID, as the national picture is predicting an increase in numbers of patients with COVID and indeed a problem with flu this year. We've seen that from the data from Australia. So as an organisation we're encouraging everybody to have their vaccines for COVID and for flu, as we would for the population. And don't forget all the hands, face and space messages that we learned through COVID, because they will be really important as we go into winter. Infections spread very easily, and we know that the measures that we've taken in the past have helped keep the numbers down and keep people safe. In the organisation we've got the COVID medicines delivery unit, which is continuing to run and is treating with monoclonal antibodies and antiviral drugs patients who have COVID and are particularly vulnerable, and the numbers of cases going through there in winter are likely to rise, and we will measure up to that. We're also expecting the number of admissions to go up through winter, and we've got a winter plan to expand the bed base within the Trust to try and accommodate the patients that we need to look after.
So, hi everyone, my name's Sam Debbage. I'm our Deputy Director of Education and Research. I just want to share with you the pathways we're creating for nurses to come to work at DBTH. As you'll already know, we support student nurses on placements with us from a variety of universities. In the last couple of years, we've created a part-time programme that's run from Doncaster College, so local people can study locally. We also have different pathway routes, so we have the trainee nurse and associate, which is a really great pathway to become a registered nurse as well. You can also go direct to become a registered nurse by doing our nursing degree apprenticeship. So as you can see, we've got quite a variety of pathways to support our own nurses. We also have been supporting international nurses to come from overseas to help us with our current nursing challenges. And we also have a variety of other opportunities. So we support work experience, so we reach out to our schools to support children to think about health and career pathways to come and work at DBTH. Not only nurses, but all different professional groups that we support in this organisation. That is clinical and non-clinical, so the variety of roles that we all know and love. So we hope to grow Team DBTH to be successful and support the staff we've already got.
Earlier this year, the Trust launched its Green Plan, which sets out the Trust's commitment and approach to sustainability. The Green Plan is a comprehensive 4-year strategy which includes various different areas of focus, including recycling and waste management. By delivering the Green Plan, Doncaster and Basildon teaching hospitals will improve sustainability and move closer towards becoming net zero, contributing to the NHS's target to become the world's first net zero health service. If anyone would like further information on the Green Plan, it's a publicly available document which can be found on the Trust website.
Hi, my name's John Sargent. I'm the Deputy Chief Exec and Director of Restoration, Innovation and Transformation at the Trust. And it's my team that have been working on the plans for a new hospital in Doncaster. We're carrying out that project in partnership with Doncaster Council, and we're looking to build a new hospital on what's called the Basin site near the college in Doncaster. We've made good progress. We've managed to produce what's called a strategic outline case, which was signed off by the board and went through ICS processes and has been submitted to NHSE, and that went in January 2022. We are now waiting for a response, and as you probably be aware, there is a national hospital programme that Boris Johnson's government put in place, and there are 8 places up for selection on that programme. We are part of that selection process, and we are awaiting a decision by the Department of Health as to who goes on to that programme. In the meantime, the Trust is continuing to carry out work on the next stage of the business case and the approvals process, and we're working with our partners in Doncaster Council on site preparation and making sure that as soon as we get approval to move ahead, we can crack on and get working on the building. We're not clear when we'll be allowed to start actual building the hospital, but we know that the council are starting to do some site preparation work already in partnership with the Sheffield region. Effectively, if we'd had approval by about now in terms of moving on with the business case from the Department of Health, we'd have expected the building to be ready in 2029. However, because we've not had that approval, we just have to wait and see when we can start the clock running on that.
We're very mindful and aware of the increasing cost of living and the impact this will be having on our colleagues, particularly as we head into the winter months with the increased energy costs. We've done some work recently to pull together all the services that are available for our colleagues and put them in one place on our intranet under financial wellbeing and support, and communicated that several times to make sure that people are aware of what's available and how to access it should they need it. So there's a number of services in place already. For example, we have Wage Stream, which we introduced recently, which is a facility whereby people can access their salary a little earlier in the month if they wish to for a particular reason. And there's all sorts of financial tips involved with that too. We're linked with a credit union to offer good interest loans and again all the financial management expertise. And also we're making sure we're really promoting the benefits and discounts that are available to NHS colleagues, because there are quite a number of things out there, so we really want to make sure that people know about that. We're also looking at what more we can do for our colleagues as well. So in the last couple of months ago, in light of the increasing mileage costs and the cost of fuel, we looked at the rates that are payable back to colleagues whether they use their cars for work purposes, and we decided to increase the rates that we pay. And we did this as a system as well, so with other partner trusts in the South Yorkshire system. So that's a change quite recently, and we're also looking at what other connections we can make as a system and work that we can do together. For example, closer links with the food banks in both Doncaster and Bassetlaw, so that's something that's underway, just starting at the moment. So we're really keen to make sure we are promoting to people, making accessible what's already available, and having conversations both as an organisation and also with our partners across both our systems about what else we might be able to do to support colleagues in future months.
So in conclusion, thank you all for your questions and for all of our speakers who've given us some very comprehensive updates and responses. Thank you. I will now ask governors and members to receive the annual report and accounts for 21-22, our annual audit letter and the Trust's constitution. All of these can be found on the website DBTH NHS UK. I want to personally thank you for tuning in to our annual members meeting. As you've heard, it's been a challenging year, but also a year defined by teamwork, hard work and dedication to get things right back on track. There will undoubtedly be challenging times ahead, but for our part as a trust, we will continue to work tirelessly for our patients, offering the very best care and treatment come what may, and keeping you informed every step of the way. Thank you, and I'll speak to you again soon.